The concrete steps leading down to the abandoned Riverside Metro station were slick with morning dew, and Marcus Chen could hear them before he saw them. Two small voices, high and desperate, echoing through the tunnels like lost birds calling for their mother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Please, sir, we just need somewhere warm to sleep. We won't cause any trouble. Marcus paused at the entrance, his city inspector's badge catching the dim light filtering through the grated ceiling. He'd been sent here to assess the structural integrity of the old station before the city demolished it next month. What he hadn't expected was to find anyone living in the abandoned tunnels beneath downtown Portland. He descended carefully, his footsteps echoing against the tiled walls that had once gleamed white, but now bore the stains of decades of neglect. The platform stretched ahead of him, empty tracks disappearing into darkness on either side. And there, huddled near what used to be a newsstand, were two children who couldn't have been older than 8. They were identical twins, both with unruly dark hair and clothes that hung loose on their thin frames. One clutched a worn backpack, while the other held what appeared to be a small stuffed animal. Their eyes were wide with fear as they spotted Marcus approaching. "We're homeless, sir," the boy with the backpack said, his voice trembling. "Our dad, he's trying to find work, but nobody will hire him because we don't have an address." The other twin, a girl, stepped slightly behind her brother but added, "We promise we won't break anything. We just need somewhere the rain can't get us." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. In his 15 years as a city infrastructure inspector, he'd seen plenty of urban decay, plenty of forgotten spaces where society's most vulnerable sought shelter. But he'd never encountered children this young fending for themselves in such conditions. He knelt down to their level, making his voice as gentle as possible. "What are your names?" "I'm Oliver," the boy said, still clutching his backpack protectively. "This is my sister, Sophia. We're 7, but Oliver's older by 4 minutes," Sophia added quickly, as if this detail was crucial to their identity. "Where's your father now?" Marcus asked. Oliver's shoulders sagged. "He's looking for work again today. He leaves early and comes back when it gets dark. Sometimes he brings food from the church, but mostly he just looks really tired." Marcus glanced around the station. Despite its abandonment, it was relatively dry and sheltered. The old waiting benches were still intact, and someone had arranged cardboard and blankets in a makeshift sleeping area near the far wall. It was clear they'd been here for more than just a night or two. "How long have you been staying here?" he asked. Sophia looked at her brother uncertainly before answering. "Since Mama went to heaven. Dad said we had to leave our apartment because he couldn't pay the rent anymore without Mama's job." The weight of their situation settled on Marcus's shoulders like a heavy coat. These weren't just homeless children. They were a family torn apart by circumstances beyond their control, trying to survive in one of the city's forgotten corners. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. All 3 of them turned toward the sound, and Marcus watched as a man in his 30s descended the steps. He was tall and lean, with the same dark hair as the twins but streaked with premature gray. His clothes were clean but worn, and he carried a paper bag that smelled like it contained sandwiches from a nearby deli. The man stopped short when he saw Marcus, his entire body tensing. "Kids, get behind me," he said quietly, but Marcus could hear the fear in his voice. "Dad, it's okay," Oliver said, running to his father's side. "He hasn't tried to make us leave yet." The man's eyes darted between Marcus and the twins, clearly calculating whether he needed to grab his children and run. "I'm sorry, sir. We'll move along." "I know we're not supposed to be here." Marcus stood slowly, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to evict you. I'm Marcus Chen, city inspector. I was sent to assess this station's condition." "David Torres," the man replied cautiously. "These are my children, Oliver and Sophia. Look, I know this isn't ideal, but we've got nowhere else to go. I've been looking for work for 3 months, but every place wants an address, references, A phone number that isn't a payphone. There was no self-pity in David's voice, just exhaustion and determination. Marcus could see the man was fighting to maintain his dignity, while admitting to circumstances that were clearly breaking his heart. The landlord kicked us out 2 weeks after Maria died, David continued, his voice growing quieter. Said he needed someone who could pay rent on time. I've been trying to keep the kids in school, but they ask questions when you don't have a permanent address. Marcus watched as Sophia tugged on her father's jacket. Did you find work today, Daddy? David's face softened as he looked down at his daughter. Not today, sweetheart, but I talked to a man at the construction site who said they might have something next week. It was a lie, Marcus realized. The gentle way David spoke, the forced optimism in his voice. He was protecting his children from the harsh reality of their situation, just like any parent would. How did you know about this place? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. David's expression changed, becoming almost nostalgic. My grandfather used to work here, back when it was still operational. He was a maintenance supervisor for the metro system for 30 years. When I was Oliver and Sophia's age, he'd bring me down here sometimes, show me how the trains worked, tell me stories about the old days. He gestured toward the tunnel walls. Grandpa always said this station was special, built different from the others, with thicker walls, better ventilation. He used to joke that they built it like a fortress instead of just a subway stop. Marcus looked around with new eyes. Now that David mentioned it, the construction did seem more robust than typical transit infrastructure. The ceiling was higher, the support beams more substantial. It was almost as if whoever designed this place had intended it for more than just moving passengers from point A to point B. When did your grandfather pass away? Marcus asked. About 5 years ago. He left me some papers, old blueprints and maintenance records from his time here. I never paid much attention to them until... David's voice trailed off as he gestured around the station. Until we needed somewhere to go. Oliver had wandered over to examine some of the old tile work while they talked, running his small fingers along patterns that had been installed decades before he was born. Dad, why are some of these tiles different colors than the others? David walked over to where his son stood. Your great-grandfather told me that too, buddy. He said the original builders made some changes during construction, sealed off certain areas. Never really explained why. Marcus felt his professional curiosity stirring. In his years of inspecting city infrastructure, he'd encountered plenty of modified buildings, spaces that had been repurposed or redesigned during construction. Usually, it was for practical reasons. Structural issues, budget constraints, design improvements. But sometimes, especially in older buildings, the modifications told more interesting stories. Do you still have those papers your grandfather left you? Marcus asked. David nodded toward their makeshift campsite. They're in my bag. I've been carrying them around because, well, I don't really have anywhere else to keep them safe. As David retrieved a worn manila envelope from their belongings, Marcus found himself genuinely intrigued. This wasn't just about the structural assessment anymore. There was something about this family, about their connection to this place, that felt significant. David handed him the envelope, and Marcus carefully extracted several yellow documents. There were indeed blueprints, hand-drawn maintenance schedules, and what appeared to be official metro system correspondence, dating back to the 1940s. But as Marcus studied the papers more closely, one document in particular caught his attention. It was a handwritten note, signed by David's grandfather, Eduardo Torres. The handwriting was careful and precise, as if the writer had chosen each word deliberately. For my grandson David, the note read, the old station holds more than memories. The builders knew something we didn't. Look where the tiles change pattern. Count the steps from the newsstand to the utility room. Grandpa always said the city builds its secrets in plain sight. Marcus looked up at David. Did your grandfather ever explain what this means? David shook his head. He was always talking in riddles like that, especially toward the end, when the dementia started getting worse. I figured it was just his way of making the place seem more mysterious to me when I was a kid. But Marcus was studying the blueprints now, comparing them to the actual layout of the station around them. There were discrepancies, small ones, but noticeable to someone trained to read architectural plans. Rooms that appeared on the blueprints but seemed to have been walled off in the actual construction. Spaces that didn't quite match their designated purposes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
David, Marcus said slowly, I think your grandfather might have been trying to tell you something important. The fluorescent light in Marcus's city office flickered intermittently as he spread Eduardo Torres's documents across his desk. It was past 7 in the evening, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something significant in that abandoned subway station. For the past 3 hours, he'd been cross-referencing the old blueprints with current city records, and the inconsistencies were becoming impossible to ignore. According to the original 1943 construction documents, the Riverside Metro Station had been built with a series of utility rooms and maintenance areas that simply didn't exist in the final structure. More intriguingly, the budget reports from that era showed massive cost overruns that were never fully explained. The project had been completed during World War II, when resources were scarce and every construction dollar was scrutinized. Yet somehow, the Riverside Station had consumed nearly 3 times its original budget without any official documentation of what that additional money had purchased. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed his supervisor, Janet Morrison. She answered on the second ring, sounding tired. Chen, please tell me you're not calling with another delay on the Riverside demolition. Actually, Janet, I think we might need to postpone that demolition entirely. There was a pause. Marcus, the city council approved that demolition months ago. The developer is already drawing up plans for the commercial complex they want to build there. I understand that, but I've discovered some irregularities in the original construction that need to be investigated. There are structural elements that don't match the city records, and given the age of the building, we could be looking at historical preservation issues. It wasn't entirely a lie, Marcus told himself. There were indeed structural discrepancies that warranted investigation. He simply wasn't mentioning the homeless family he'd found living there, or the cryptic note from Eduardo Torres that had started this whole investigation. How long are we talking about? Janet asked with a sigh. Give me 2 weeks. If I can't document legitimate reasons to preserve the site by then, we'll proceed with the original demolition timeline. 2 weeks, Marcus. And it better be bulletproof, because Councilman Bradley has been pushing hard for this development project. After ending the call, Marcus leaned back in his chair and considered his next move. He could approach this investigation through official channels, file the appropriate requests for historical surveys and architectural assessments. But that would take months, and David Torres and his children needed help now, not after a bureaucratic process had run its course. Instead, Marcus found himself thinking about Eduardo Torres's note. Count the steps from the newsstand to the utility room. It was specific enough to suggest the old man had something particular in mind, but vague enough that it could mean anything. The next morning, Marcus returned to the Riverside Station carrying a measuring tape, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee he'd picked up from a nearby deli. He also brought 3 breakfast sandwiches, though he wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't like he was obligated to feed the Torres family. He found them in the same area as before, but this time the children were engaged in what appeared to be a math lesson. David had drawn numbers and simple equations on a piece of cardboard, using it as a makeshift whiteboard, while Oliver and Sophia worked through addition problems. Good morning, Marcus called out as he approached, not wanting to startle them. David looked up, surprise evident on his face. Mr. Chen, I didn't expect to see you again. I brought breakfast, Marcus said, offering the bag containing the sandwiches. And I wanted to talk to you about those papers your grandfather left you. Oliver's eyes lit up at the mention of food, but he looked to his father for permission before accepting anything. The restraint in such a young child was heartbreaking. These kids had learned to be cautious about accepting help, even when they desperately needed it. It's okay, David told his children. Mr. Chen is being kind to us. As the twins unwrapped their sandwiches, Marcus showed David what he'd discovered during his research the night before. The discrepancies in the blueprints, the unexplained budget overruns, the sealed-off areas that appeared in the original plans but not in the final construction. Your grandfather's note mentions counting steps from the newsstand to the utility room, Marcus explained. But according to these blueprints, there should be a utility room behind that wall that doesn't seem to exist anymore. David studied the documents while absently helping Sophia open her sandwich wrapper. Grandpa always said this place was built for more than just trains. During the war, a lot of public buildings had dual purposes, places that could serve as air raid shelters or emergency facilities if needed. Marcus nodded. That would explain the reinforced construction. But it doesn't explain why certain areas were sealed off after completion, or where all that extra money went. Can we help? Oliver asked, having finished his sandwich with remarkable speed. We know this place really well now. We've explored almost everywhere. It's not really safe for you to be wandering around down here alone, Marcus said gently. We're not alone, Sophia pointed out with 7-year-old logic. We're together, and Daddy taught us which areas to avoid because they might have loose tiles or broken glass. David looked embarrassed. I've tried to teach them to be careful. This isn't exactly the environment I wanted to raise them in. There was such pain in the man's voice that Marcus felt compelled to offer reassurance. You're doing what you have to do to keep them safe and together. That takes courage. It doesn't feel courageous, David replied quietly. It feels like I'm failing them every day. Dad, you're not failing us, Oliver said with startling maturity. You make sure we eat and stay warm and keep learning math. That's what good dads do. Marcus watched the interaction and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about solving a historical mystery or conducting a structural assessment anymore. This was about a family trying to rebuild their lives after losing everything, finding hope in the most unlikely of places. Tell you what, Marcus said, making a decision that surprised even him. Why don't we explore this place together? If there really is something hidden here that your grandfather wanted you to find, maybe it's time we figured out what it is. David looked uncertain. I don't want to get you in trouble with the city. You said you were here on official business. I am here on official business. I'm conducting a thorough structural assessment, and that includes investigating any irregularities in the original construction. Marcus smiled. Having guides who know the layout intimately would actually be quite helpful. Over the next several hours, the 4 of them systematically explored the station, using Eduardo Torres's blueprints as their guide. Oliver and Sophia proved to be excellent assistants, their small size allowing them to examine areas that would have been difficult for adults to access. They measured distances, compared the actual layout to the original plans, and documented every discrepancy they found. The children approached it like a treasure hunt, which Marcus supposed it was, in a way. The tiles here are different, Sophia observed, running her hand along a section of wall near what the blueprints indicated should have been a utility room entrance. They're newer than the others, and they don't line up with the pattern. Marcus examined the area she'd indicated. She was right. The tiles were clearly from a different batch, installed at a different time. More importantly, they seemed to be covering something. When he tapped the wall behind them, it sounded hollow. David, come look at this. David joined them, pressing his ear to the wall and knocking gently with his knuckles. There's definitely empty space behind here, and look at this. He pointed to the floor where the newer tiles met the original ones. There's a seam here, like they cut through the original floor and then patched it. Marcus consulted the blueprints again. According to the original plans, this area should have been part of a maintenance corridor that connected to a utility room. But in the actual construction, it appeared that corridor had been sealed off and disguised to look like a solid wall. Grandpa's note said to count steps from the newsstand, Oliver remembered. How many steps from here to there? They measured the distance carefully. 47 steps from the newsstand to the area where the suspicious tiles were located. Marcus wrote the number down, though he wasn't sure what significance it might have. He also mentioned something about the city building its secrets in plain sight, David said, studying his grandfather's handwriting again. What if he meant this literally? What if there's something here that looks like part of the normal station infrastructure but actually serves a different purpose? Marcus was beginning to understand why Eduardo Torres had been so cryptic in his note. If there really was something hidden in this station, something valuable enough to warrant the kind of construction modifications and budget overruns he'd discovered, then it made sense that the old man would have been careful about how he communicated that information. Your grandfather worked here for 30 years, Marcus said thoughtfully. He would have been here during the original construction, during the war years, and through all the subsequent maintenance and renovations. If anyone would have known about hidden features in this building, it would have been him. He used to tell stories about the war, David remembered. About how scared everyone was, how people were hiding valuables and important documents in case the worst happened. He said Portland felt so far from the fighting, but everyone knew the world was changing. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in his mind. A subway station built during World War II with unusual structural features and unexplained cost overruns. A maintenance supervisor who worked there for decades and left cryptic notes about hidden secrets. A modern family seeking shelter in the same place where their ancestor had once worked. What if, Marcus said slowly, your grandfather wasn't just talking about architectural features? What if he was talking about something that was deliberately hidden here during the war? The implications of that possibility hung in the air between them. During World War II, people had indeed hidden valuable items, important documents, even money in secure locations. If someone had used the construction of the Riverside Station as an opportunity to create a hidden storage area, it might have remained undiscovered for decades. But why wouldn't Grandpa have retrieved it himself? David asked. If he knew something was here, why leave it hidden? Maybe he couldn't access it safely, Marcus suggested. Or maybe he was waiting for the right time, the right circumstances. He looked around at their small group. Maybe he was waiting for someone who really needed it. As the afternoon wore on, they continued their systematic exploration of the station. In addition to the suspicious wall area Sophia had identified, they found 2 other locations where the actual construction didn't match the original blueprints. Each discrepancy was subtle, but together they painted a picture of a building that had been deliberately modified during construction to serve purposes beyond its official function. Marcus was beginning to feel like an archaeologist uncovering an ancient civilization, except this civilization was less than a century old, and its artifacts were hidden beneath layers of tile and concrete, rather than earth and time. We should probably call it a day, David said as the natural light filtering through the station's grated ceiling began to fade. The kids need to eat dinner and get some rest. Of course, Marcus agreed, but he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something addictive about the investigation, about the possibility that they were on the verge of uncovering something significant. As they gathered their materials and the children collected their belongings, Marcus made another decision that surprised him. David, I've been thinking. This investigation is going to take some time, and I'll need to document everything properly for the city. Would you be interested in helping me with that? I could pay you as a consulting assistant, someone with historical knowledge of the site. David stopped what he was doing and stared at Marcus. Are you serious? Completely serious. You know this place better than anyone, and your grandfather's documents are crucial to understanding what we're looking at here. I could process the paperwork to make it official. Temporary employment with the city's infrastructure department. That would mean... David's voice caught slightly. That would mean I'd have income. An address to put on job applications. It would mean you'd have legitimate work while we figure out what your grandfather was trying to tell you, Marcus confirmed. Oliver looked up from the backpack he'd been organizing. Does this mean we can stay here? At least until you finish your investigation? Marcus glanced around the station. It wasn't exactly ideal living conditions for a family, but it was dry, secure, and apparently had historical significance that could justify their presence during the investigation period. I think I can arrange for the site to be classified as temporarily occupied for research purposes, he said carefully. That would prevent any other city departments from disturbing the area while we work. Sophia clapped her hands together excitedly. We get to be treasure hunters. We get to be researchers, Marcus corrected gently. But yes, we're looking for something that's been hidden for a very long time. As they prepared to leave for the evening, Marcus realized that his life had taken an unexpected turn. 24 hours ago, he'd been a city inspector conducting routine structural assessments. Now he was part of a team investigating a decades-old mystery, providing employment to a homeless father, and trying to solve puzzles left behind by a man who'd been dead for 5 years. But as he watched Oliver and Sophia carefully pack their few possessions and saw the hope beginning to return to David's eyes, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes the most important discoveries weren't about buildings or historical artifacts. Sometimes they were about finding ways to help people rebuild their lives. Tomorrow, they would return to the station and continue their investigation. They would measure more distances, examine more walls, and try to decode more of Eduardo Torres's cryptic messages. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they would find whatever the old maintenance supervisor had wanted his grandson to discover. But even if they found nothing more than architectural curiosities and historical footnotes, Marcus realized they'd already discovered something valuable. They'd found each other, and sometimes that was treasure enough. The morning fog rolled through downtown Portland as Marcus arrived at the Riverside Station carrying a leather satchel filled with more sophisticated equipment than he'd brought the previous day. He'd spent the evening requisitioning ground-penetrating radar equipment, thermal imaging cameras, and digital measuring tools from the city's engineering department. If there really was something hidden behind those walls, he was determined to find it. David was already awake when Marcus descended into the station, sitting quietly on one of the old benches while Oliver and Sophia slept curled together under a collection of blankets. The sight of the children sleeping in such surroundings tugged at something deep in Marcus's chest, reinforcing his determination to help this family find stability. "You're early," David whispered, careful not to wake the twins. "I couldn't sleep," Marcus admitted, setting down his equipment. "I kept thinking about your grandfather's note, about what he might have been trying to tell you." David stood and walked over to examine the devices Marcus had brought. "This looks serious." "It is serious. I've been researching the history of this station all night, and I found some interesting connections." Marcus pulled out a manila folder filled with photocopied documents. "Did you know that during World War II, several wealthy Portland families moved their assets out of banks and into private storage?" "I didn't know that, no." There was genuine fear that if the Japanese invaded the West Coast, banks would be the first targets, so people with significant wealth started looking for alternative ways to protect their valuables. Marcus opened the folder and showed David a newspaper clipping from 1943. "Look at this." The headline read, "Local Industrialists Form Private Security Consortium." The article detailed how a group of Portland's wealthiest citizens had pooled resources to create secure storage facilities in undisclosed locations throughout the city. "The interesting thing," Marcus continued, "is that this consortium was formed just 2 months before construction began on the Riverside Station. And 3 of the consortium members had business connections to the construction company that built this place." David studied the newspaper clipping more carefully. "Are you suggesting they used the subway construction as a cover for building a private vault?" "I'm suggesting it's possible. Think about it. A subway station would have legitimate reasons for underground construction, reinforced walls, secure access points. If you wanted to hide something valuable, you couldn't ask for better camouflage." A small voice interrupted their conversation. "Good morning, Mr. Chen." Sophia had awakened and was sitting up in her makeshift bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Good morning, Sophia. Did you sleep well?" She nodded, then looked around at the equipment Marcus had brought. "Are those the machines that can see through walls?" Marcus smiled. "Something like that. Would you like to help us use them?" "Can we really?" Oliver had awakened at the sound of voices and was immediately alert with excitement. "Absolutely. But first, let's get some breakfast in, everyone." Marcus had stopped at a nearby diner and brought eggs, pancakes, and orange juice for the family. As they ate, he explained how the various pieces of equipment worked and what they would be looking for. "The ground-penetrating radar sends radio waves into the ground and walls," he told the children. "When those waves hit something different, like metal or empty space, they bounce back differently. The computer shows us a picture of what's hidden, like X-ray vision?" Oliver asked. exactly like X-ray vision. After breakfast, they began their systematic scan of the station. Marcus started with the area where Sophia had noticed the mismatched tiles, slowly moving the radar device along the wall while watching the readout on his laptop screen. For the first several minutes, the readings showed nothing unusual, just solid concrete and the normal infrastructure you'd expect behind subway station walls. But as he moved toward the area that should have been the sealed utility room, according to Eduardo's blueprints, the display began showing something different. David, look at this. The radar image showed a clear void behind the wall, roughly rectangular in shape and significantly larger than the building plans had indicated. More intriguingly, there appeared to be objects within that void, shapes that were too regular to be natural formations. There's definitely something back there, Marcus said, his excitement growing. And it's not just empty space. How do we get to it? David asked. Marcus consulted Eduardo's blueprints again, then walked to a different area of the station. According to these plans, there should have been an access door here. He pointed to a section of wall that looked identical to the rest of the station's tile work. But it was sealed during construction and disguised to match the surrounding wall. They spent the next hour using the thermal imaging camera to map the exact boundaries of the sealed door. The temperature differences were subtle, but the outline was clearly visible once they knew what to look for. It's like a hidden door in a castle, Sophia said with delight. That's exactly what it is, Marcus agreed. The question is how to open it without damaging whatever might be inside. David had been studying his grandfather's documents while Marcus worked with the equipment. There's something else in Grandpa's papers I didn't notice before, he said, holding up a hand-drawn sketch. Look at this. The sketch showed a cross-section view of what appeared to be the station wall, with measurements and notations in Eduardo's careful handwriting. At the bottom of the page, there was a sequence of numbers. 4, 7, 1, 9, 4, 3. Those numbers, Marcus said slowly. 47 is the number of steps from the newsstand to this wall. 1943 is the year the station was built. But what does it mean? Oliver asked. Marcus examined the sketch more carefully. The numbers were written next to what appeared to be a mechanical diagram, gears, levers, and some kind of rotating mechanism. I think, Marcus said slowly, your grandfather is showing us how to open the door. They spent the next 2 hours examining every inch of the wall area where the thermal imaging had revealed the sealed entrance. Finally, Sophia made the crucial discovery. This tile moves, she announced, pressing on a section of wall that looked identical to all the others. Marcus hurried over to examine what she'd found. The tile did indeed move slightly when pressed, and when he looked more closely, he could see that it wasn't actually attached to the wall in the same way as the surrounding tiles. It's a false tile, he realized. It's covering some kind of mechanism. Carefully removing the loose tile revealed a small metal panel with a series of numbered buttons, a combination lock that had been hidden behind the wall's facade for nearly 80 years. 471943, David read from his grandfather's sketch. Marcus entered the numbers slowly, and after the final digit they heard a soft click from within the wall. A section of what had appeared to be solid tile and concrete swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow corridor that stretched back into darkness. Oh my goodness, David breathed. It's real. It's actually real. Marcus shined his flashlight into the corridor. The beam revealed a tunnel perhaps 4 feet wide and just tall enough for an adult to walk through without stooping. The walls were lined with the same white tile as the rest of the station, but these tiles were pristine, unmarked by decades of use and neglect. Should we go in? Oliver asked, his voice hushed with excitement. We should be very careful, Marcus replied. This tunnel has been sealed for almost 80 years. We don't know what the air quality is like, or whether the structure is stable. But even as he spoke, Marcus could feel fresh air moving through the corridor, a sign that there was ventilation from somewhere ahead. And the construction appeared to be as solid as the rest of the station, perhaps even more so. I'll go first, Marcus decided. David, you follow me, and kids, you stay close behind your father. The corridor stretched for about 20 feet before opening into a larger space. As Marcus's flashlight beam swept across the room, all four of them gasped in unison. They were standing in what could only be described as a private vault. The room was perhaps 15 feet square, with reinforced concrete walls and a ventilation system that had kept the air fresh for decades. But it was the contents of the room that took their breath away. Along the walls stood several large metal cabinets, each one sealed with heavy locks. In the center of the room sat an ornate wooden desk, and behind it, built into the wall itself, was a massive safe that looked like it had come from a bank. "This is incredible," David whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. Marcus approached one of the metal cabinets and examined the lock. Unlike the hidden entrance mechanism, these locks appeared to be conventional, though they were of exceptionally high quality. The kind of locks that would have been expensive even in the 1940s. "Look at this," Sophia called from near the desk. She was pointing at a brass nameplate that had been mounted on the desk's surface. Portland Industrial Security Consortium, Estes 1943. Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This was their vault. The wealthy families who formed that consortium, they built this during the subway construction. They had a legitimate reason to be doing underground work, so no one questioned the extra time, the additional materials, the cost overruns. But why would they abandon it? David asked. If they went to all this trouble to create a secure storage facility, why leave it sealed up? Marcus walked over to examine the large safe. Despite its age, it appeared to be in excellent condition, protected from the elements by the controlled environment of the vault. There was a combination dial on the front, and below it, an engraved plaque that read, "In trust for future generations." Maybe they didn't abandon it, Marcus said thoughtfully. Maybe they always intended for it to be found eventually, by the right people, at the right time. "What do you mean?" Oliver asked. "Think about it. Your great-grandfather worked here for 30 years. He would have known about this vault, but he never accessed it himself. Instead, he left clues for his family to find it when they needed it most." David looked around the vault with new understanding. "You think Grandpa knew we would end up here? That we would need whatever's in this room?" "I think your grandfather was a wise man who understood that sometimes help comes in unexpected ways," Marcus replied. "And I think he wanted to make sure his family would be taken care of, even if he couldn't do it directly." They spent the next several hours carefully documenting everything in the vault. Marcus photographed each cabinet, the safe, and the desk from multiple angles. He measured the room's dimensions and sketched its layout. If this discovery was as significant as it appeared to be, he wanted to have thorough records of everything they found. The metal cabinets proved to be unlocked, and when they opened the first one, they found it filled with documents. Stock certificates, property deeds, insurance policies, and other financial papers dating from the 1940s. Many of the companies and properties referenced in the documents no longer existed, but some did, and the implications were staggering. "These stock certificates," David said, examining a thick folder of documents. "Some of these companies are still around. They've changed names, been bought and sold, but they're still operating." Marcus looked over David's shoulder at what appeared to be original stock certificates for several companies that had grown into major corporations over the subsequent decades. If these certificates were legitimate and had retained their value through all the corporate changes and stock splits of the past 80 years, they could be worth a substantial amount of money. The second cabinet contained something even more intriguing: carefully wrapped artwork and jewelry, paintings by artists Marcus didn't recognize, but which appeared to be signed originals. Jewelry pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum, collectibles and artifacts that had been carefully preserved in climate-controlled conditions for 8 decades. "This is like opening a time capsule," Sophia observed with 7-year-old wisdom. She wasn't wrong. Everything in the vault had been carefully selected and preserved by people who clearly expected these items to retain or increase their value over time. They had been thinking not just about protecting their wealth during the war, but about creating a legacy that would benefit future generations. But it was the contents of the large safe that would prove to be the most significant discovery of all. Marcus had been studying the combination lock, trying to determine if there were any clues in Eduardo's documents about how to open it. The safe was clearly the centerpiece of the vault, and logic suggested that whatever was inside would be the most valuable items in the collection. "Dad, look at this," Oliver called from where he'd been examining the desk. He was holding up a small leather journal that had been tucked into one of the desk drawers. David took the journal and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with handwriting in multiple styles. Apparently, several different people had contributed to this record over time. "It's like a logbook," David said, reading from the first page. "Listen to this. Initial deposit, March 15th, 1943. Consortium members contributing assets as agreed. Vault sealed and secured. Access restricted to designated heirs and authorized representatives." Marcus looked up from his examination of the safe. "Designated heirs? Does it say who those were?" David flipped through several pages, reading entries that detailed additional deposits, the rotation of security responsibilities, and the eventual decision to seal the vault completely as the war ended and the perceived threat diminished. "Here," David said, finding the entry he was looking for. "September 12, 1945. Final security protocol established. Vault access limited to direct descendants of consortium members, with priority given to those in demonstrated need. Combination to primary safe entrusted to facility maintenance supervisor Eduardo Torres, to be passed to his heirs as circumstances warrant." The room fell silent as the implications of that entry sank in. "Your grandfather had the combination to the safe," Marcus said quietly. "But he never used it," David replied, looking around the vault. "He never took anything for himself." Marcus thought about what they knew of Eduardo Torres. A man who had worked as a maintenance supervisor for 30 years, who had raised a family on a modest income, who had never displayed any signs of hidden wealth. A man who had been trusted with access to potentially millions of dollars in assets, but who had honored that trust by leaving everything untouched. He was waiting, Marcus realized. He was waiting for his family to need it. David's hands were shaking slightly as he continued reading from the journal. Several pages from the end, he found an entry in Eduardo's familiar handwriting, dated just a few months before the old man's death. "My grandson David is a good man, but the world has not been kind to him. His wife Maria is sick, and I fear what will happen to their family when I am gone. If they should ever find themselves with nowhere else to turn, this place and its contents are my gift to them. I have been the guardian of other people's legacies for 40 years. Now I want to leave one for my own family." David's voice broke as he read the final lines of his grandfather's entry. "The safe combination is Maria's birthday, month, day, year. She was always the light in David's life, and now she can light the way to his family's future." Marcus watched as David walked slowly to the large safe, his hand trembling as he reached for the combination dial. Maria's birthday. Marcus didn't know the date, but David certainly would. "October 3rd, 1987, David said softly, beginning to turn the dial. "She would have been 38 next month." The safe's lock mechanism was well made and well maintained, and despite its age, it opened smoothly when David completed the combination sequence. The heavy door swung open with a soft whoosh of equalized air pressure. Inside, they found the vault's greatest treasures, stacks of cash, carefully wrapped and preserved, in denominations that spoke to serious wealth. Gold coins and bars, each one stamped with official mint marks and carefully cataloged. More stock certificates, these bearing the names of companies that had become industrial giants in the decades since the vault was sealed. But more than the monetary value, they found records, detailed documentation of every item that had been placed in the vault, along with current valuations and instructions for liquidating assets if necessary. The consortium members had not just hidden their wealth, they had created a system for accessing and utilizing it when the time came. "There's a letter here," Oliver said, reaching for an envelope that had been placed prominently on one of the shelves inside the safe. The envelope was addressed simply, "To the Torres family." Inside, they found a typed letter signed by all 5 members of the original consortium. "If this vault has been opened," the letter began, "it means that Eduardo Torres's family has found themselves in circumstances that require assistance. Eduardo has been not just our employee, but our trusted partner in preserving these assets for future need. It is our unanimous decision that should his descendants ever require aid, they should have full access to the consortium's emergency reserves, with our gratitude for Eduardo's decades of faithful service. The letter went on to detail the legal framework the consortium had established for transferring ownership of the vault's contents. They had apparently worked with lawyers to create a trust that would become active only when specific conditions were met, conditions that included demonstrated financial need on the part of Eduardo's heirs. Marcus sat down heavily on the floor of the vault, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had discovered. This wasn't just a hidden cache of valuables. It was a carefully planned legacy, designed to provide security for Eduardo Torres's family across generations. How much do you think it's all worth? Sophia asked with the directness of childhood. Marcus looked around the vault, mentally cataloging everything they had found. The cash alone appeared to total hundreds of thousands of dollars. The gold and jewelry could be worth significantly more, and the stock certificates, if they had retained and grown their value over the decades, could potentially be worth millions. I think, Marcus said carefully, your great-grandfather and his employers have made sure your family will never have to worry about having a home again. David was still standing at the open safe, staring at the contents as if they might disappear if he looked away. I don't understand how this is possible. How did Grandpa never mention this? How did he live so modestly when he had access to all this? Because he was an honorable man, Marcus replied. He was trusted with something that didn't belong to him, and he protected that trust even when it might have made his own life easier to break it. But now it does belong to us, Oliver said, trying to work through the logic of the situation. According to the legal documents we've found, yes, it does, Marcus confirmed. But that means you have a responsibility too. Your great-grandfather kept this secret and protected these assets for decades. Whatever you decide to do with this discovery, you'll want to make sure you honor his legacy. David finally turned away from the safe and looked at his children. Oliver and Sophia were watching him with expectant faces, waiting to see how he would react to their sudden change in circumstances. The first thing we're going to do, David said firmly, is make sure this discovery is handled properly. We need lawyers, accountants, people who can help us understand exactly what we've found and what our obligations are. And the second thing? Sophia asked. David smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, it was a smile free of worry and exhaustion. The second thing is we're going to find you a proper home, with bedrooms and a kitchen and a backyard where you can play. Can Mr. Chen come visit us in our new house? Oliver asked. Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Over the past few days, he had become more than just a city inspector conducting an assessment. He had become part of this family's story, part of their journey from desperation to hope. I would be honored to visit you in your new house, Marcus told Oliver. As they prepared to leave the vault for the day, Marcus realized that Eduardo Torres had been far wiser than anyone could have imagined. The old maintenance supervisor had understood something that most people never learn: that the greatest treasures are not the ones we keep for ourselves, but the ones we preserve for those who will need them most. The Torres family had entered the riverside station as homeless refugees, seeking nothing more than shelter from the rain. They were leaving as inheritors of a fortune that would change their lives forever. But more than that, they had discovered something even more valuable than money. They had learned that they were part of a legacy of care and protection that stretched across generations. Tomorrow, Marcus would help them begin the process of legally claiming their inheritance. There would be paperwork to file, valuations to conduct, and decisions to make about how to manage their newfound wealth responsibly. But tonight, as they sealed the vault and returned to the main station area, Marcus knew they had already found the most important treasure of all. They had found hope. And sometimes, that was worth more than all the gold in the world. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the conference room on the 15th floor of Portland City Hall, watching as David Torres signed the final documents that would officially transfer ownership of the consortium's assets to the Torres Family Trust. The room was filled with lawyers, accountants, and city officials, all working to ensure that the most unusual inheritance case in Portland's history was handled properly. The authentication process had been thorough and complex. Every stock certificate had been verified, every piece of artwork appraised, every legal document examined by experts in corporate law and estate planning. The final valuation had exceeded even Marcus's most optimistic estimates, $90 million. The consortium's careful investments and the natural appreciation of their assets over 8 decades had created a fortune that would secure the Torres family for generations. But more than the money itself, the discovery had revealed a story of trust, patience, and love that had captivated everyone involved in the legal proceedings. "Mr. Torres," said Margaret Chen, the estate attorney who had been handling the case, "with your signature on this final document, the transfer is complete. The Torres Family Trust is now the legal owner of all assets recovered from the Riverside Station vault." David set down his pen and looked around the room at all the people who had worked to make this moment possible. His eyes found Marcus, who had been present for every meeting, every legal consultation, every step of the process. "I still can't quite believe this is real," David said quietly. "It's real," Marcus assured him, "and your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled everything." The process hadn't been simple. The city had initially claimed ownership of anything found on public property, leading to several weeks of legal negotiations. But the consortium's original legal framework had been thorough, and Eduardo Torres's position as the designated trustee had been clearly documented. More importantly, the city's investigation had revealed that the consortium members had actually purchased the land where the vault was located before donating it to the city for the subway project, creating a legal easement that protected their property rights in perpetuity. Oliver and Sophia had handled the disruption to their routine with remarkable adaptability. During the legal proceedings, Marcus had arranged for them to stay in a hotel near downtown, giving them their first experience with room service, cable television, and beds that didn't involve cardboard and blankets on a subway platform. "Where are Daddy and the lawyers going now?" Sophia asked Marcus as the adults gathered their papers and prepared to leave the conference room. "They're going to the bank," Marcus explained, "to set up accounts and make sure all the money is properly protected." "And then we can buy a house?" Oliver wanted to know. "Then you can buy several houses if you want," Marcus said with a smile. "But I think your father has some other ideas about what to do with all this money." David had indeed been thinking carefully about how to use his family's unexpected windfall. The previous evening, he had shared some of his ideas with Marcus over dinner at a restaurant that would have been unimaginable luxury just a month ago. "I keep thinking about what Grandpa wrote in that journal," David had said, "about being the guardian of other people's legacies. I don't want to just spend this money on ourselves. I want to do something that would make him proud." "What did you have in mind?" "There are so many families like we were," David had replied. "People who are working hard, trying to do the right thing, but who just can't catch a break. What if we could help them the way Grandpa helped us?" Now, as they left City Hall and walked toward the bank, Marcus could see that David was already putting those plans into motion. He had asked the estate attorney to research the legal requirements for establishing a charitable foundation, and he had been in contact with several local organizations that worked with homeless families. The bank meeting was surreal in its own way. Marcus watched as David, who had been counting coins for food money just weeks earlier, sat across from the bank's vice president discussing investment strategies and philanthropic giving structures. The transformation wasn't just financial. David carried himself differently now, with a confidence born not of wealth, but of security and possibility. "Mr. Torres," the banker was saying, "with an initial deposit of this magnitude, we can offer you our premium private banking services. You'll have a dedicated financial advisor, and we can help you establish whatever charitable entities you're considering." "I appreciate that," David replied, "but I want to make sure we're working with people who understand what this money means to my family. It's not just about growing wealth. It's about honoring a legacy and helping other people the way we were helped." After the banking appointments, Marcus drove the Torres family to look at houses. The real estate agent, an enthusiastic woman named Patricia Williams, had prepared a selection of properties ranging from modest suburban homes to luxury estates. "Given your budget," Patricia said as they drove through an upscale neighborhood, "you could afford practically anything in the Portland area. Are there any specific features that are important to you? David looked back at Oliver and Sophia, who were pressed against the car windows, marveling at the size of the houses they were passing. We want a home, David said simply. Not a showplace, not an investment. A place where my kids can have friends over, where we can cook dinner together, where they can do homework at a kitchen table instead of on a subway platform. The house they eventually chose was perfect in its imperfection. A 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, mature trees in the backyard, and a front porch that invited evening conversations. It wasn't the most expensive house they had looked at, but it felt like home the moment they walked through the front door. This room could be Oliver's, Patricia said, showing them a bedroom with built-in bookshelves and windows that looked out over the backyard. And this one could be Sophia's, she continued, opening the door to a slightly smaller room with a window seat that caught the afternoon sunlight. But it was the third bedroom that made David's decision final. It was set up as a home office, with a desk positioned near the window and built-in filing cabinets along one wall. This could be Grandpa's room, David said quietly, and Marcus understood immediately. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. A space where Eduardo Torres's memory would be honored, where the documents and photographs from the vault would be preserved, where the family's story would be remembered and shared with future generations. The paperwork for the house purchase was completed within days, another testament to how much their circumstances had changed. Marcus helped them coordinate the moving process, though there wasn't much to move beyond the few possessions they had accumulated during their time at the subway station. It feels strange, David admitted as they stood in the empty station one last time, gathering the blankets and personal items that had comprised their temporary home. A month ago, this place was our whole world. Now it feels like it belongs to someone else's life. It belongs to the part of your life that brought you to where you are now, Marcus said. That's not something to be ashamed of or forgotten. It's part of your family's story. The city had decided to preserve the Riverside Station as a historical site rather than proceeding with the planned demolition. The discovery of the vault had generated significant media attention, and several historians had expressed interest in studying both the consortium's activities and the broader context of wartime asset protection in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus had been promoted to Senior Historical Preservation Specialist, a newly created position that would allow him to focus on uncovering and protecting Portland's hidden architectural treasures. It was work that felt meaningful in a way his previous inspections never had. But the real transformation was in the Torres family themselves. Oliver and Sophia adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience of children, but they also retained the compassion and appreciation that had developed during their time of need. They asked to visit the local homeless shelter on weekends, bringing toys and books to children who were living the life they had so recently escaped. David threw himself into the work of establishing the Eduardo Torres Foundation, a charitable organization focused on providing emergency assistance and transitional housing for families experiencing homelessness. He worked closely with social service agencies, learning about the complex factors that contributed to housing instability and the most effective interventions. The thing people don't understand, David explained to Marcus during one of their regular coffee meetings, is that most homeless families aren't that different from any other families. They're not addicts or criminals or people who've made terrible choices. They're just people who had something go wrong, a job loss, a medical emergency, a death in the family, and they don't have the resources to recover from it. The foundation's first major project was the renovation of a former apartment building into transitional housing for families. Each unit would provide temporary accommodation for up to 6 months, along with access to job training, childcare, and financial counseling services. Marcus had volunteered to oversee the building renovation, applying his expertise in structural assessment and historical preservation to create housing that was both functional and dignified. I want these apartments to feel like homes, not shelters, David had told the architect. I want children to be proud to tell their friends where they live, even if it's just temporary. The building renovation had become a community project, with local businesses donating materials and volunteers contributing labor. The story of the Torres family's discovery had inspired people throughout Portland, and many wanted to be part of the foundation's work. 6 months after the vault discovery, Marcus stood in the courtyard of the renovated building, watching as the first families moved into their temporary homes. Oliver and Sophia were there too, helping younger children carry boxes and showing them where the playground equipment had been installed. "Mr. Chen," a voice called, and Marcus turned to see David approaching with a middle-aged woman and 2 teenage boys. "I'd like you to meet the Williamson family," David said. "They're moving into apartment 3B today. Sarah, these are my friends Marcus Chen and his children Oliver and Sophia." Marcus shook hands with Sarah Williamson, noting the mix of gratitude and determination in her expression that he remembered seeing in David's face months earlier. "Mr. Torres has told us about what happened to your family," Sarah said, "about how you found each other and how that led to all this." She gestured around the courtyard, taking in the renovated building, the playground, the community garden that residents would tend together. "We're grateful for the opportunity to get back on our feet," Sarah continued. "My boys and we've been staying with relatives since my husband died, but it wasn't a permanent solution. This gives us time to figure out what comes next." Marcus watched the interaction, struck by how naturally David had stepped into the role of helping others navigate circumstances he understood all too well. There was no condescension in his manner, no sense that he was doing charity work from a position of superiority. He was simply someone who had been helped when he needed it most, and who was now in a position to extend that same help to others. Later that evening, Marcus joined the Torres family for dinner at their new home. It had become a weekly tradition, one that Oliver and Sophia looked forward to as much as he did. The house had been furnished simply but comfortably, with an emphasis on creating spaces where the family could spend time together. The kitchen table where they ate dinner was large enough for homework and art projects. The living room had comfortable couches arranged to encourage conversation rather than just television watching. But it was Eduardo's office that had become the heart of the home. The walls were lined with photographs. Pictures of Eduardo during his years working at the subway station, images of the vault discovery, documentation of the foundation's work. The desk held a few carefully chosen items from the vault: Eduardo's journal, a photograph of the original consortium members, and the brass nameplate that had identified the Portland Industrial Security Consortium. "I've been thinking about something," David said as they finished dinner. "About Grandpa and why he never used any of the money in the vault for himself." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "I think he understood something that most people don't. He knew that real security doesn't come from having money. It comes from knowing that you're part of something bigger than yourself, that you're connected to people who care about you and who you care about in return." David looked around the table at Oliver, Sophia, and Marcus. Grandpa could have taken money from that vault and made his life easier. But if he had done that, we never would have found it when we really needed it. We never would have learned that we were part of a legacy that goes back generations. And we never would have met Mr. Chen, Sophia added with 7-year-old directness. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And I never would have learned what it means to be part of a real family." The truth was, Marcus's life had been transformed as much as the Torres family's had been. His work had always been solitary, focused on buildings and structures rather than the people who inhabited them. But his involvement with David, Oliver, and Sophia had shown him a different way of living, one that prioritized relationships and community over professional achievement. "There's something I want to ask you," David said, his tone becoming more serious. "The foundation is growing faster than I expected. We're getting requests for help from families all over the state, and I'm realizing that I need people I trust to help me make sure we're doing this right." Marcus waited, sensing that something significant was coming. "I'd like you to consider joining the foundation full-time. As our director of operations, you'd be responsible for overseeing all our housing projects, working with city governments to identify properties that could be converted to transitional housing, managing the renovation projects." Marcus set down his coffee cup, considering the offer. It would mean leaving his position with the city, stepping away from the security of government employment to join a startup nonprofit organization. "The salary wouldn't be as much as you're making now," David continued. "At least, not initially. But you'd be part of something that's making a real difference in people's lives." "Can Mr. Chen think about it?" Oliver asked. "It's a big decision." Marcus smiled at the boy's maturity. "I can think about it," he agreed. "But honestly, I don't think I need much time. The answer is yes." "Really?" Sophia asked, bouncing in her chair with excitement. Really, Marcus confirmed. I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing with my life than working to help families the way your great-grandfather helped all of us. Over the following months, the Eduardo Torres Foundation expanded its operations throughout Oregon and into neighboring states. Marcus traveled constantly, identifying properties, coordinating renovations, and working with local social service agencies to establish support programs for transitional housing residents. But the most rewarding part of his work was seeing families graduate from the Foundation's programs into permanent housing, stable employment, and renewed hope for the future. Each success story felt like a validation of Eduardo Torres's original vision, that help should be available for those who needed it most, provided with dignity and respect. A year after the vault discovery, Marcus stood once again in the Riverside subway station, but this time he wasn't alone. The station had been converted into a museum and community center, with exhibits detailing the consortium's wartime activities and the discovery of the vault. School groups toured regularly, learning about Portland's history and the importance of community support during difficult times. David was there too, along with Oliver and Sophia, for the official dedication ceremony. The mayor was present, along with several city council members and representatives from the various organizations that had partnered with the foundation. When we first discovered this vault, David said in his speech to the gathered crowd, I thought we had found a treasure. And we had, but not the kind I expected. We found something much more valuable than money or gold. We found proof that people care about each other across generations, that help is available even when it seems like you're completely alone, and that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is the knowledge that they made life better for someone else. He paused, looking around the station that had once been their temporary home and was now a symbol of hope for the entire community. My grandfather, Eduardo Torres, spent 40 years protecting other people's treasures. But the real treasure he left behind wasn't hidden in a vault. It was the example of how to live with honor, how to care for others, and how to trust that good things are possible even in the darkest times. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the Torres family prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look around the station. The platform where he had first encountered Oliver and Sophia crying in desperation was now part of an exhibit about family resilience. The area where they had discovered the hidden entrance was marked with a plaque honoring Eduardo Torres and the consortium members who had created this extraordinary legacy. Are you ready to go? David asked, walking over to where Marcus stood. I'm ready, Marcus replied, but I want to say something first. He turned to face David, Oliver, and Sophia. The day I met you three, I thought I was just doing my job. I was here to assess a building for demolition, fill out some paperwork, and move on to the next assignment. I had no idea that I was about to become part of the most important story of my life. You saved us, Oliver said simply. No, Marcus replied. We saved each other. Your great-grandfather understood something that took me 40 years to learn. That the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can put in a vault. They're the connections you make with other people, the help you give when someone needs it, and the knowledge that you're part of something bigger than yourself. As they walked up the steps and out of the station together, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that morning, when he had first heard two small voices crying in the tunnels below. The Torres family had found security and purpose. The foundation had helped hundreds of other families transition from homelessness to stability. And Marcus had discovered that his true calling wasn't inspecting buildings. It was helping to build communities. The subway station's treasure had been worth $90 million. But the real fortune was the family they had become and the lives they had been able to touch. Eduardo Torres had been right. The city did build its secrets in plain sight. Sometimes the greatest treasures were hidden not in vaults but in the connections between people who chose to care for each other. That evening, as Marcus sat in his own apartment planning the foundation's next housing project, he received a text message from Sophia. It was a photo of a drawing she had made at school, a picture of their family standing in front of the renovated apartment building with the words, Helper Heroes, written in crayon at the bottom. Marcus smiled and saved the image to his phone. Tomorrow, he would frame it and put it on his desk, right next to the photograph of Eduardo Torres and the brass nameplate from the consortium vault. Because some treasures were worth more than gold, and some legacies were measured not in dollars, but in the number of lives they touched. The Torres family had entered that subway station as homeless refugees, seeking shelter from the storm. They were leaving as guardians of a legacy that would help families for generations to come. And sometimes, Marcus thought, that was exactly how treasure was supposed to work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.